The fire cracked and popped as it consumed the hand-stitched quilt, the flames curling around threads her grandmother had sewn by candlelight over 3 long winters. And for one suspended moment, Claire Bennett simply stood in the doorway of the honeymoon suite, watching everything her family had ever given her turn to ash. What would you do if the people about to become your family took the modest, handmade gifts your loved ones sacrificed to send and burned them in front of you, laughing the entire time? What would you do if they called your mother's carefully wrapped porcelain dishes garbage? If they called you a beggar bringing filth into their pristine world? Claire did not scream. She did not cry. She stood perfectly still, her expression carved from something far colder than grief, while the 2 women responsible for the fire dabbed at tears of laughter rolling down their perfectly contoured cheeks. None of them, not the sisters cackling by the marble fireplace, not the mother-in-law smiling approvingly from the velvet chaise, had the faintest idea that in exactly 11 minutes, armored vehicles bearing a royal seal would be surrounding the entire hotel, and armed guards from the oldest banking vault in Europe would be marching through that very door, carrying steel cases that would end their privileged lives forever. To understand how Claire Bennett found herself standing motionlessly in a designer hotel suite while her family's love literally burned in front of her, we must return 2 years earlier to a modest, overcrowded community center on the edge of a struggling neighborhood, where a woman calling herself Claire Bennett worked as a social worker, spending her days advocating for families trapped in poverty, filling out endless paperwork for housing assistance, and driving a second-hand hatchback, a check engine light that had been illuminated for over a year. Nobody at that community center, not her supervisor, not the family she helped, not a single soul in her modest apartment building, had any idea that the tired, compassionate woman filling out benefit applications was, in fact, Her Serene Highness, Princess Claire von Aschenfeld, sole surviving heir to the Aschenfeld dynasty, a sovereign European lineage whose accumulated wealth, banking holdings, and sovereign trust funds exceeded, by conservative estimate, well over $1 trillion. She had grown up inside palace walls layered in centuries of gold leaf and oil paintings, taught from childhood that every relationship carried the invisible weight of her inheritance, that every friend, every suitor, every smiling face at court functions might secretly be calculating exactly how much access to her fortune they could extract through proximity. By the time she turned 26, Claire had grown desperate to escape the suffocating isolation of being loved for her name rather than her grandfather, the reigning sovereign before his passing, had once told her that true wealth reveals itself only in the moments people believe you possess nothing at all, and that wisdom haunted her enough that she made the drastic decision to step away from her official duties, transferring interim authority to the royal council and a trusted regent, disappearing into an entirely fabricated identity with forged credentials, a modest rented apartment above a laundromat, and a bank account containing only the earnings of an entry-level social worker. She wanted, more than anything, to know if a man could ever look at her and see only her, without the crushing weight of dynastic obligation clouding his judgment. It was during this fragile chapter of reinvention that she met Nathan Whitcomb, a struggling contractor renovating the community center's crumbling roof, a man with calloused hands, an easy laugh, and absolutely no idea that the woman handing him coffee every morning could purchase his entire construction company without noticing the ants. In those early months, Nathan seemed almost impossibly genuine, arriving early to fix things that were not technically part of his contract, staying late to help Claire finish paperwork for families facing eviction, never once asking about her past beyond polite curiosity, content simply to know the woman standing in. He took her to dive bars with sticky floors and cheap beer, taught her how to properly grill a burger over a rusted backyard grill he had built himself, and told her one evening, sitting on the tailgate of his pickup truck under a sky full of stars, that he did not care what she had before, only what she wanted to build with him going forward. Claire, starved for this kind of uncomplicated affection, allowed herself to fall completely, believing, for the first time in her adult life, that she had found a man who wanted her simply because of who she was, not the fortune concealed beneath her modest disguise. The shift began slowly, almost imperceptibly, around the 8th month of their relationship. right after Nathan introduced her to his mother, Diane Whitcomb, and his two younger sisters, Brooke and Madison, women who had never worked a single day in their lives, existing entirely off a generous family trust their late father had established through a series of fortunate real estate investments decades earlier. From the very first dinner at the Whitcomb family estate, an ostentatious modern mansion filled with marble countertops and imported Italian furniture, Claire felt Diane's eyes conducting a silent, merciless inventory of her modest outfit, her department store shoes, her chipped manicure, calculating her worth down to the penny before a single word of genuine conversation had passed between them. "So you work with underprivileged families?" Diane had asked, swirling wine in a crystal glass, her tone carrying that particular brand of politeness that functions as a precisely aimed insult. How noble. Someone has to do that sort of thing, I suppose. Murray, Brooke and Madison, dressed head to toe in Gucci from their monogrammed handbags to their embellished sneakers, had barely acknowledged Claire's presence throughout that first dinner, speaking exclusively to each other about designer sample sales and an upcoming trip to Monaco, occasionally glancing in Claire's direction with expressions of amused, condescending curiosity, as though she were a specimen they had encountered at a zoo rather than their brother's girlfriend. "Where did you say you got that dress?" Madison had asked at one point, her tone dripping with theatrical sweetness that fooled absolutely no one at the table. "It has such a vintage quality to it." Claire had smiled, recognizing the insult buried beneath the compliment, and simply replied that she had purchased it at a department store sale, watching Madison's eyebrows rise with barely concealed horror at the admission. The microaggressions accumulated steadily over the following year, growing bolder and more deliberate as Brooke and Madison grew increasingly comfortable expressing their contempt. At a family barbecue, Brooke loudly wondered aloud whether Claire's car would even survive the drive home, gesturing dismissively toward Claire's aging hatchback, parked awkwardly among a fleet of luxury vehicles in the estate's circular driveway. At a birthday celebration for Diane, Madison presented Claire with a small, clearly regifted candle, announcing to the entire room that she wasn't sure what someone like Claire would actually appreciate, her voice pitched deliberately loud enough to draw laughter from the assembled guests. At another gathering, someone left a printed article about thrift store fashion trends on Claire's dinner plate, an anonymous, cruel joke that everyone at the table seemed to find hilarious except Claire herself, who absorbed the humiliation with a composed, unreadable expression that only seemed to fuel their contempt further. Nathan, rather than defending Claire against his sister's escalating cruelty, began quietly asking her to simply endure it, framing his requests as necessary sacrifices for family harmony. "They just need time to warm up to you," he explained one night, avoiding her eyes as he said it, his voice carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who had already decided which battles were worth fighting for. "Can you just let it roll off for me? Once we're married, things will settle down, I promise." Claire, clinging to the fragile hope that the man who once taught her to grill burgers on a rusted backyard grill might eventually find the courage to defend her, agreed each time, swallowing insult after insult, smiling through condescension that grew sharper with each passing month, telling herself that patience would eventually be rewarded with loyalty and respect. She had no idea, during those long months of quiet endurance, exactly how far Brooke and Madison's cruelty was ultimately prepared to go. Wedding planning proceeded despite the mounting tension, largely funded by Claire's modest savings and a small contribution from Nathan's income, since Diane had made it explicitly clear during one uncomfortable dinner that the Whitcomb Family Trust would not be subsidizing what she referred to, with a dismissive wave of her hand, as a courthouse-level affair. Claire's own family, modest and working class, had pooled together what little they could afford to send thoughtful, handmade gifts ahead of the wedding. A quilt hand stitched by her grandmother over 3 winters, a set of simple ceramic dishes her mother had painted herself in a community pottery class, a wooden jewelry box her father had carved during long nights after his factory. These gifts arrived at the hotel where the wedding festivities were being held 2 days before the ceremony, delivered directly to the honeymoon suite where Claire and Nathan would eventually spend their first married night. The afternoon before the wedding, Claire had stepped out briefly to retrieve her dress from the hotel's alteration service, leaving the honeymoon suite unlocked at Nathan's suggestion so his sisters could help arrange the wedding gifts for photographs, a task she had innocently trusted them to handle with basic decency. When she returned 20 minutes later, keycard in hand, she pushed open the heavy door of the honeymoon suite and immediately smelled smoke, an acrid, unmistakable scent that sent a cold jolt of alarm through her chest before she had even fully processed the scene unfolding before her eyes. Brooke and Madison stood beside the suite's grand marble fireplace, flames roaring higher than any decorative fire should reasonably burn, feeding pieces of Claire's family gifts into the hungry blaze one by one with theatrical, gleeful cruelty. The hand-stitched quilt, Claire's grandmother's 3 winters of careful work, was already half consumed, its edges curling black as flames devoured the delicate stitching. Beside the fireplace, shattered fragments of her mother's hand, painted ceramic dishes lay scattered across the marble hearth, apparently thrown against the stone before being swept into the fire. The careful floral patterns her mother had painted with such loving precision now reduced to broken, blackened shards. Diane sat nearby on a velvet chaise, sipping champagne, watching her daughter's destruction with an expression of serene, approving amusement, as though observing a pleasant afternoon performance rather than the deliberate annihilation of another family's love. "Oh, Claire, you're back," Brooke said, not even bothering to look particularly guilty, tossing the last remaining fragment of the wooden jewelry box into the flames with a casual flick of her wrist. "We were just clearing out some clutter. Honestly, we couldn't have this garbage sitting in the honeymoon suite for photographs. Can you imagine the embarrassment if someone important saw handmade quilts and dollar store dishes in the background?" Madison giggled beside her sister, swirling her own glass of champagne, her Gucci sandals catching the firelight as she nudged a final scrap of burning fabric deeper into the flames with the toe of her shoe. "We're doing you a favor, honestly," Madison added, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Nathan's friends would have laughed at you if they saw this stuff. Beggars really shouldn't bring garbage to weddings like this." Claire stood frozen in the doorway, watching the last remnants of her grandmother's quilt collapse into glowing embers, watching her mother's careful brushstrokes disappear into ash, watching her father's patient woodworking reduced to smoke, curling toward the suite's elegant crown molding. She felt something inside her chest go utterly, inhumanly still. A coldness so complete it seemed to erase every trace of the warmth she had spent 2 years carefully cultivating within herself. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply watched, her expression carved from stone, while Diane raised her champagne glass slightly in Claire's direction, as though offering a toast to her own daughter's cruelty. "Don't look so dramatic, dear," Diane said, her tone light and utterly unbothered. "It's just clutter. You'll thank us eventually, once you understand how things work in our world." Claire said nothing. She turned, walked calmly to the small writing desk positioned near the suite's floor-to-ceiling windows, and retrieved a slim, unmarked satellite phone from her handbag, a device her personal security detail had insisted she carry at all times throughout her entire period of anonymous exile, precisely for a moment like this one. She dialed a single number from memory, a private line connected directly to the Ashenfeld Sovereign Trust headquarters, and spoke 4 words in a language none of the Whitcomb women recognized, her voice flat, controlled, utterly devoid of the emotion boiling beneath her frozen exterior. "Execute protocol, Ashenfeld immediate." Then she ended the call, set the phone down gently on the writing desk, and turned back to face Brooke, Madison, and Diane with an expression of such complete, glacial calm that even they, in their oblivious arrogance, felt an unfamiliar prickle of unease creep up their spines. "What was that?" Brooke asked, her earlier confidence flickering slightly as she registered something unsettling in Claire's transformed demeanor. "Who were you calling?" Claire did not answer immediately. She simply walked to the window overlooking the hotel's circular driveway 11 stories below and waited, her back straight, her hands folded calmly in front of her, while the fire continued crackling behind her, consuming the last remaining fragment of her family's life. Within minutes, the first sounds began reaching the suite, distant at first, then rapidly growing louder, the unmistakable wail of sirens converging from multiple directions simultaneously, followed by the heavy, mechanical rumble of numerous vehicle engines approaching the hotel's entrance in coordinated, disciplined formation. Diane rose from the velvet chaise, moving toward the window with sudden, nervous curiosity, her champagne glass forgotten on a side table. Below, in the circular driveway, a fleet of matte black armored vehicles was pulling into formation, their headlights cutting through the fading afternoon light, doors opening in unison as dozens of men in formal dark uniforms emerged with disciplined, purposeful efficiency. At the center of the convoy, a heavier, reinforced transport vehicle rolled to a stop, its rear doors opening to reveal several guards carrying large steel cases, their weight evident in the careful, measured way the guards handled them, cases that clearly contained something of extraordinary value and importance. "Claire," Diane said, her voice suddenly uncertain, the earlier condescension draining rapidly from her tone. "What exactly is happening right now?" Claire turned from the window, her expression still perfectly composed, and looked directly at the woman who had spent an entire year treating her like something unworthy of basic respect. "You just burned the only physical possessions my family could afford to give me," Claire said quietly, her voice carrying an edge that made even Brooke, still standing near the smoldering fireplace, take an instinctive step backward. "I made a phone call, that's all." Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the suite, followed by a firm, authoritative knock. Claire crossed the room and opened the door herself, revealing a tall, silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored formal suit, flanked by armed guards in dark tactical uniforms, bearing a small, dignified crest embroidered discreetly on their shoulders. "Your Serene Highness," the man said, bowing his head slightly with practiced formality, "Ambassador Heinrich Voss, Aschenfeld Sovereign Trust." We came as quickly as protocol allowed. Behind him, 4 additional guards entered the suite, carrying the heavy steel cases, positioning them carefully on the room's large dining table, while Brooke, Madison, and Diane stood frozen in stunned, disbelieving silence. "Your Serene Highness," Madison repeated numbly, the words seeming to physically hurt as they left her mouth. Her earlier arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by dawning, horrified comprehension. "What is he talking about? Claire, what is happening?" Claire walked to the center of the room, standing beside Ambassador Voss as he began methodically unlocking the steel cases, each mechanism releasing with a heavy, deliberate click that seemed to echo through the suite's sudden, oppressive silence. The first case opened to reveal a magnificent ceremonial crown, gold and encrusted with sapphires that caught the room's ambient light with breathtaking brilliance, an object clearly centuries old, radiating an authority that required no explanation. The second case contained an elaborate wax seal press bearing the Aschenfeld royal crest, alongside thick folios of official documents bound in aged leather and stamped with golden insignia. "Now this," Ambassador Voss announced, his voice carrying the formal weight of someone accustomed to delivering pronouncements of enormous consequence, "is the sovereign testament of the House of Aschenfeld, confirming the full transfer of dynastic authority, trust holding, and accumulated sovereign wealth to Her Serene Highness, Princess Claire von Aschenfeld, effective immediately upon her declared return from anonymous exile." He withdrew a final document from the second case, unfolding it with careful precision, revealing detailed financial ledgers listing holdings across banking institutions, real estate portfolios, and sovereign investment funds spanning multiple continents, a fortune whose total value exceeded $1 trillion, now formally and irrevocably transferred into Claire's name. Diane's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the suite's polished hardwood floor, the sound sharp and final amid the stunned, disbelieving silence that had fallen over them. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her earlier condescension replaced entirely by naked, undignified terror. "You're a social worker. You drive a car with a check engine light. This has to be some kind of elaborate mistake." Claire turned to look at her, and for the first time since arriving at the Whitcomb family estate over a year earlier, allowed the full weight of her true identity to settle visibly across her features, her posture straightening, her expression carrying an unmistakable authority that had been carefully concealed beneath months of deliberate, humble disguise. "There's no mistake, Diane," Claire said, her voice quiet but carrying easily through the sweet, stunned silence. I am the sole heir to the Aschenfeld sovereign dynasty. I chose to live modestly for 2 years because I wanted to know if your son could love me without knowing what I was worth. Your daughter's just answered a question I had been asking myself for quite some time. She turned toward the smoldering fireplace, where the last remnants of her grandmother's quilt still glowed faintly among the embers, and felt something cold and absolute settle permanently into place within her chest. They burned the only things my family could afford to give me, she continued, and called my mother's love garbage. I think it's time they understood exactly what they destroyed. Ambassador Voss stepped forward, producing a sleek tablet device from within his jacket. Its screen, already displaying secure financial transfer interfaces, connected directly to the Aschenfeld Sovereign Trust's central banking authority. Your Highness, he said, shall we proceed with the additional directives you outlined during your call? Claire nodded once, her expression unwavering. Yes, immediately. Voss began entering commands with practiced efficiency, and within moments, a series of confirmation notifications populated across the tablet screen, each one representing a devastating, irreversible financial action being executed in real time. Brooke Whitcomb and Madison Whitcomb, Voss announced formally, reading directly from the tablet screen. Your family trust fund, held through Meridian Private Banking, has just been flagged and frozen pending a formal ownership dispute initiated by the Aschenfeld Sovereign Trust, which holds a controlling financial interest in Meridian Private Banking through several long-standing sovereign investment agreements. Brooke's face drained of all color, her manicured hands trembling as she reached for her phone, presumably to call the family's financial advisor, only to find, moments later, that her banking application displayed nothing but a stark, unresponsive error message. This can't be happening, she stammered, her voice cracking with rising panic. That trust has always been ours. My father set it up decades ago. You can't just... I can, Claire interrupted, her voice carrying absolute, unshakable finality. Your family's trust has been sitting inside a banking institution that depends entirely on sovereign lending agreements with my family's holding for its continued operational liquidity. One phone call from me, and Meridian Private Banking either freezes your accounts pending review or loses access to the sovereign credit lines that keep their entire operation solvent. They made their choice within 90 seconds of my call. Madison sank slowly onto the velvet chaise, her Gucci sandals suddenly looking absurd and small against the weight of what was unfolding around her, tears beginning to streak down her perfectly contoured cheeks as the full scope of the devastation settled over her. Additionally, Voss continued, glancing toward Claire for confirmation before proceeding, Her Highness has instructed that both Brooke and Madison Whitcomb be formally and permanently removed from membership at the Kensington Society, the Ashford Country Club, and the Meridian Global Charitable Foundation Board, all institutions maintaining direct sponsorship agreements with Aschenfeld Family Holdings. Diane's legs seemed to give out slightly, and she gripped the back of the velvet chaise for support. Her earlier regal composure completely collapsed into raw, undignified panic. Those memberships took years to she whispered. Our entire social standing, everything, was built on a foundation you never actually controlled. Claire finished for her, her tone carrying no trace of mercy. You simply never realized it until today. Nathan burst into the suite at that exact moment, having apparently been informed by hotel staff of the commotion, his face pale and confused as he took in the scene before him. Armored guards positioned throughout the room. His mother and sisters collapsed in various states of devastated shock, and Claire standing at the center of it all, with an authority he had never once witnessed during their entire relationship. Claire, what's going on? What is all this? He asked, his eyes darting between the ceremonial crown resting in its open case and the guards standing at attention along the suite's walls. Claire turned to look at him and felt, for the first time, the complete and total absence of any lingering affection, replaced entirely by a vast, quiet clarity regarding exactly who he had always chosen to be. Your sisters burned my family's wedding gifts, Nathan, she said calmly. The quilt my grandmother spent 3 winters stitching, my mother's hand-painted dishes, my father's carved jewelry box. They burned all of it and called my family beggars bringing garbage into your world. And you, she continued, watching him flinch, spent the last year asking me to simply endure that kind of cruelty for the sake of family harmony? Nathan opened his mouth to respond, some desperate explanation forming behind his eyes. But Claire raised her hand, silencing him with the same effortless authority she had inherited from generations of sovereign rulers before her. "I am the sole heir to the Ashenfeld dynasty," she said. "I chose you because I believed, for a while, that you saw me rather than my absence of visible wealth. Today I learned that your family's cruelty was never actually about my modest circumstances. It was simply about cruelty itself, and you were always too passive to stop it." She walked past him toward the suite's entrance, Ambassador Voss and the guards falling into formation behind her, the steel cases containing her family's sovereign testament being carefully resealed and prepared for transport. "The wedding is canceled," she said without turning back. "I'd wish your family well, but I don't believe any of you deserve even that small courtesy." Behind her, Diane's voice rose in a desperate, undignified wail, some incoherent plea for reconsideration that arrived decades too late to carry any meaning, while Brooke and Madison remained collapsed on the suite's expensive furniture, sobbing into their manicured hands as the full weight of their sudden, absolute financial ruin settled permanently over their previously privileged lives. Claire did not turn around. She walked out of the honeymoon suite, down the hotel's grand corridor, and into the elevator, descending toward the lobby where the fleet of armored vehicles waited to carry her away from the wreckage of a relationship built on cruelty she should never have tolerated for as long as she did. The following weeks unfolded with a swift, merciless efficiency that only genuine sovereign authority could provide. The Whitcomb family trust remained permanently frozen, pending a formal legal review that ultimately concluded with the majority of their remaining assets being redirected toward a settlement favoring Claire. Compensation for what the Ashenfeld legal team formally categorized as deliberate destruction of sovereign family heirloom. Brooke and Madison found every social door that had once opened effortlessly for them now permanently closed. Their names quietly circulated among elite circles as cautionary examples of the catastrophic consequences awaiting anyone foolish enough to publicly humiliate a woman whose true identity remained concealed. Diane's social standing evaporated entirely within a month. Her invitations to every charitable board and social committee formally rescinded once whispers of the incident spread through the exact circles she had spent decades trying to impress. Nathan's construction business, dependent on contracts with development companies connected to Ashenfeld's sovereign holdings, collapsed within a fiscal quarter, his name becoming synonymous, within certain circles, with cowardice and catastrophic misjudgment. Claire returned to the Ashenfeld estate within the month, resuming her full sovereign responsibilities with a clarity and resolve that had been noticeably absent before her extended period of anonymous exile. She had gone searching for love, uncomplicated by her inheritance, and had instead discovered something far more valuable, an unshakable understanding that her family's love, however modest in material form, had always carried more genuine worth than every diamond and designer label the Whitcomb women had paraded so carelessly. Months later, addressing a gathering of young sovereign heirs during a private leadership retreat, she was asked whether she regretted the painful lessons of her anonymous life among ordinary citizens. She considered the question carefully, then answered with the same quiet, unshakable calm that had once stood motionless while her family's gifts burned into ash before her eyes. "I learned that character reveals itself most honestly in the moments people believe carry no consequences," she said. The Whitcomb family believed a handmade quilt and painted dishes could be destroyed without cost because they assumed poverty meant powerlessness. True power doesn't need to shout to be respected. It only needs to remember patiently until the exact moment arrives to remind everyone precisely what they underestimated. And so, dear viewer, that is how a trillion-dollar heiress disguised as a humble social worker watched her family's love burn in a hotel fireplace and then dismantled an entire privileged family's fortune before the ashes had even finished cooling, leaving behind a disgraced mother, 2 bankrupt sisters, and a groom who learned, far too late, that the quietest woman is sometimes the one holding an entire sovereign empire. And what did you think of this masterful revenge? Did the Whitcomb family get exactly what they deserved? If you loved watching arrogant elites lose absolutely everything in a single devastating afternoon, smash that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of karma, justice, and quiet sovereign power, finally reclaiming what was always rightfully